is a big-ass crowd.
You know.
Thank you so much, Kaz. I know I'm biased, but that doesn't mean it isn't true. Don't we have the best volunteers and organizers in this operation? And I'm so thrilled to be with you to talk about where our country is headed and why this is our chance to answer the cynicism and the exhaustion in Washington by taking things into our own hands and making sure 2020 is a year we can all be proud of when we look back on this moment. And I know you're ready for that too. So I want to start by asking you to paint a picture in your mind in as much detail as you can about a moment that is in our future. And that is the day that for the first time the sun comes up over the Rockies and Donald Trump is no longer the president of the United States. Let that image soak in for a little bit.
Yes, God.
Because that day is in our future. It'll happen one way or the other sooner than later. Let's make sure it happens sooner. But let's make sure we're ready for that day too. Because if you really think about it, if you really spend a little time picturing how it's going to feel on that day, you see right away that that's not the day our troubles end, that's the day that our work begins. Think about it. On that day, our country will be even more divided, even more polarized and torn up by politics than we are right now. Crying out to be unified and brought into a sense of common purpose. Needing a president who can do that. And at the same time, something else will be true, which is that our country will face crises that will be even deeper and more urgent than they are right now. Issues that are not going to take a break for the presidential election or the impeachment process or anything else going on in Washington. So think about it. The sun will be coming up in a climate that is this close to the point of no return in our atmosphere. We got to do something about that because that is crying out for action. The sun will be coming up over an economy where they tell us everything's going along just great because the Dow Jones is looking good, but where one job is not enough for far too many Americans, that is crying out for action, and we'll be facing that president on that first day. The sun will be coming up over schools where kids are getting active shooter drills before they are old enough to know how to read. That is crying out for action on day one. So think about what that means. It means that we're going to need a president ready to get big things done with bold ideas that meet the moment for those issues, and one who is determined to actually do it in a way that will have our country be more unified. Be ready to galvanize, not polarize, the majority of Americans who want progressive change. And yes, that is a majority of Americans. I know that sounds like a tall order, but it is for things like that that the presidency was invented. The reason I'm asking for your support is that I believe the presidency has a purpose. And the purpose of the presidency is not the glorification of the president, it is the empowerment and the unification of the American people. That's what this election is about, and that's why I'm running for president. So, how are we going to get that done? Well, the good news is, we already have a roadmap. And the guideposts on that roadmap are the values that we share as Americans. We just got to pay closer attention to what those values require of us. Let's start with one that I think is on our mind a lot right now. The values we're supposed to feel when we look at this flag. And know that honoring this flag requires a lot more than hugging it, literally, or throwing yourself a military parade. That honoring this flag does not involve overthrowing military justice to pardon war criminals.
What the hell?
It calls for a different kind of patriotism and commitment to national security. A love of country that begins with the knowledge that our country consists of people, and you cannot love a country if you hate half of the people in it. I'm talking about something better. I'm talking about a love of country that motivates the right kind of presidency, to look at the way that our troops trust the commander-in-chief with their lives and know that they will never be let down by a president who doesn't think things through. And I'm talking about making sure that our adversaries and our allies recognize this to be a country that keeps its word. And when I am your commander-in-chief, no ally will ever question whether it's a good idea to bet your life on the credibility of the United States of America. That needs to be fixed and fast. But if we mean business when it comes to keeping our country safe, protecting our country, protecting each other, we got to recognize that that starts right here at home. If we're serious about protecting our country, that means protecting its future. And that is why, in the name of security, we need to stand up and confront global climate change as the global security threat of our time. And if we're serious about protecting this country, then the time has come, again, in the name of security, to see to it that the Second Amendment can never again be twisted into an excuse to do nothing at all about common sense gun reforms that are going to save American lives. The time is now. So that's what values like patriotism and love of country mean to me. See, it's the very same values they're using to try to divide us that could be guiding the way forward. I think about faith. One of those values that is now being used to tell some people they don't belong. Faith being used to exclude. In a country that knows better. When I think about what faith might mean for guiding political choices, I'm thinking about the way they're cutting food stamps, and I'm hearing the words ringing in the back of my head, "I was hungry and you did not feed me." I'm looking at the border and I'm thinking about, "I was a stranger and you welcomed me." That's where faith leads me. So we can offer people of faith a choice in this election, and in doing so also insist on the constitutional principle that this country belongs to people of every religion and of no religion equally, and God does not belong to a political party in the United States of America. These are our values. I'm thinking about values like democracy. Not just democracy, the system, democracy, the set of values that tells us it matters morally that we see to it, that every vote is counted and that every voter counts. That's why we got to do something to do away with districts drawn by politicians picking out their voters instead of the other way around. Let's fix that in the name of democracy. Let's have a 21st Century Voting Rights Act to say once and for all that racially motivated voter suppression cannot stand in the United States of America. And yes, that goes for voter suppression in Indian country too. Every vote must be counted. Let's do something about Citizens United, and if that takes a constitutional amendment, then that's why the Constitution allows for amendments. It's to defend our democracy. I'm even going to go out on a limb and suggest that in a democracy in the future, we might want to go ahead and pick our nation's leader by just counting up all of the votes and giving it to the one who got the most votes, like we do in every other election. These are our values, our respect for work. But if we mean business respecting work, then how about we make sure that work is taxed at a lower rate, not a higher rate, than wealth? How about we put an end to the days when a company can make billions in profits and pay less in taxes than you and I did last year? Let's fix that and honor work. And let's honor the value of American freedom, but do so knowing that there's more to freedom than just cutting every regulation and tax you've ever seen. That's not enough to make us free. If we want to be free, we got to recognize that freedom is about being able to live a life of our choosing. Now, sometimes that does mean getting government out of the way. Like, let's keep county clerks out of the business of telling you who you ought to marry based on their idea of their religion. Let's recognize that the war on drugs has done more harm than good and put an end to incarceration as a response to possession. Let's keep government out of the business of dictating to women what their reproductive health care choices are. But then sometimes solving a problem means insisting that the public sector step up. Every mayor knows this instinctively because we're in charge of things like getting you clean, safe drinking water, because you're not free if you don't have it. You're not free if there's not a well-paved, well-plowed road to get you to where you're going. We expect it of our schools, which is why it's time for our local schools to enjoy the backing of a Secretary of Education who believes in public education and supports teachers. And yes, I believe the time has come for the public sector to step up and deal with the issue of health care, because you're not free if you don't have it. That's why we need Medicare for all who want it. Deliver the program for anybody who wants it, but I trust you to decide whether you want it, because you will make the right choice. These are the values that can lead us forward, solve big problems, and do it in a way that serves to unite the American people. And we got to get to work, because we can't wait. This can't wait 10 years. This can't wait 4 years. It needs to happen now. We can't wait any longer on climate. If the science tells us that the deadline scientifically to do something drastic is 2030, then the political deadline is 2020, because we're going to need a president who believes in climate science. Let's get that done now. In a country where racial and economic inequality have moved in the wrong direction, let us act now to make sure that race has no bearing on your health or your wealth, your life expectancy, or your relationship with law enforcement in the United States of America. And I can't wait. With lives on the line, we can't wait to demonstrate that we will take the same level of resources and open conversation that we have for physical, medical issues, and finally see that that is applied to mental health and to addiction too. They can't wait, because lives are on the line. This is our chance to do something about these issues. And I'm offering a little bonus into the bargain, another public health initiative, which is that if I'm your president, you can look forward to turning on the news, seeing the White House, and feeling your blood pressure actually go down a little bit instead of up through the roof. Wouldn't that be nice? Are we ready for that? But to do that, we've got to build a movement. We got to make sure we keep calling out to progressives, keep calling out to moderates. And I gotta say, even though we're not going to agree on everything, I'm meeting an awful lot of what I like to call future former Republicans who are done with this president and ready to join the cause. And they should feel welcome. This is about bringing an end to the crisis of belonging that is gripping our country. I think we're all feeling it in different ways. People being told in a million different ways that you don't belong because of your religion or your race or who you love or a disability or where you fit in the economy, or for whatever reason, people are getting the message that you don't belong. My message is the only thing that doesn't belong in this country is exclusion and hate. We can build a culture of belonging in this country, and it starts now. It starts with this campaign. We don't even have to wait We can do it right now in the course of the campaign before the first vote is even cast. It is happening in the way supporters are treating each other, and it inspires me. And if we can do that in this campaign, just think what we can do with the presidency in hand, using it for the right reasons and moving it in the right direction. That's why I'm running for president. That's what you're a part of. And that's why we're here. Now, this whole thing started a year ago with no money, not much of an email list, and 4 people in an office space smaller than the stage I'm standing on right now. And now we have grown into something extraordinary. But the way I see it, there's no room too big to have some kind of conversation. So now that I've shared a little bit about our values motivating this campaign, we have gathered up questions from folks as you were on your way in here. And to be your voice and guide that conversation, I'd like you to welcome to the stage another one of our fantastic supporters. Please welcome Rebecca Ramiro Vargas with the famous fishbowl, who's going to guide this discussion. And if the question sounds like yours, give a little holler. I'll try to look in your direction, although this light is awfully bright.
Okay. Do you believe that the House should suspend Bolton? Subpoena!
Subpoena Bolton.
Sorry.
Well, let me say this. For the first time in a long time, I'd really like to hear what Ambassador Bolton has to say. I mean, look, this brings me to something. Yes, they should, and he should be called as a witness. And we all know what should happen in the gravely important constitutional process of impeachment. What should happen is that it be carried out without regard to party politics. But you can see not an awful lot of good faith among the Senate GOP right now. Yeah. And here's what's important. As we watch that process move toward a kind of what might be a foregone conclusion, I think by design it's making us feel a kind of exhaustion watching it. It's just a kind of helplessness, knowing that they're going to do what they're going to do. And it's very important not to allow that to take hold, because that's where the cynics win. When we are so beaten down that we just walk away. This is our opportunity to actually do something different, no matter what happens on the floor of the Senate. Now is our chance to make sure that we, the people, send the message that maybe the Senate GOP can't or won't, and we'd better make the most of that opportunity.
This is from Chero Coro, and she says, "What?"
Hi.
Hi. Oh, sorry. What metrics should we use to measure the economy besides GDP and the stock market?
Oh, what a great question. That's a great question. Because they're telling us everything's going great. And they say, just look at the stock market. And I'm glad, I'd rather have it going up than going down, but that's not the same as an economy working for all of us. You know, there's not a single county in the United States of America where somebody working full-time on minimum wage can afford a 2-bedroom apartment. Not one county. And in most places, not even a 1-bedroom. Here's something to think about. Life expectancy in our country is going down. People are living shorter lives. Which raises the question, if you're looking at the stock market, how is that even possible? And if it's happening, what is the point? So as your question says, well, we're counting the wrong things. So what are we going to do about it? Here's what I'm going to do. When I'm president, we will measure the success of our economy, not by GDP growth, not by the stock market, but by the income growth of the 90%, because that tells us whether the economy's working for you, working for us. And I think that's a much better metric to go by than what they're doing now.
This is from Peter.
Good name.
you about the national deficit.
Okay. So it has not been fashionable in my party to talk about the deficit or the national debt, which is too bad, because even though Republicans like to talk about it when they're running for office or when they're arguing against progressive investments in health infrastructure, food security, and education, it turns out when they actually get to Washington, they don't care. And you can tell because we got $1 trillion deficit under a Republican president. And actually, this has been going on for quite some time. So, good idea maybe for my party to own this issue. And here's why it matters. It's not like deficit spending doesn't sometimes have to happen for good economic reasons. But seeing it go to the level that it's at, that means more money servicing the debt that we could be using to invest in things like social safety net and food security and health and infrastructure that have a payoff in the long run. That's the first reason. Second reason is we're not going to be in an expansion forever. And when we have the next recession, it'd be nice to have a little bit of wiggle room, which we have less and less of as the debt grows. And the third is a matter of generational justice, which is that the longer somebody's planning to be here, I'm thinking about a future generation, the more they might have to be stuck with the bill for this. So let's do something about the debt. Now here's what we're going to do. First of all, you'll notice that I'm careful what I promise in this campaign. Still big investments, game-changing investments. There's a reason why, even though I want to make sure college cost is a barrier for no one, there are some people wealthy enough that I want them to go ahead and pay their own tuition. So we can save those dollars for something else. When it comes to healthcare, we figured out a way to solve the issue that costs $1.5 trillion, not exactly a small amount of money, but $1.5 trillion instead of 20, 30, or 40, depending who you look at. So we're going to pay attention to the cost of the things I'm putting forward, but also we're going to make sure that we pay for everything that I've proposed in this campaign. And we can do it just by asking corporations and the wealthy to pay their fair share, by rolling back the Trump tax cut that went to the wealthiest and that we didn't need, and ensuring that those who do best by our economy contribute the most. If we do that, we have more than enough resources for a growing, strong economy and to pay down the debt while we're delivering on these programs, and we shouldn't be afraid to say so.
This is from Heather. I am a teacher. What?
Thank you.
What will you do to support teachers? Because we already have enough cheeks for accountability.
Yes.
To prove we are competent.
I see it. Sort of.
Sorry, to prove
Very
we
good.
are competent.
Yeah. Checks and accountability. Oh, to prove you're competent. Yeah. And you're supposed to prove you're competent by having half of your job reduced to test administration and the other half of your job being automated away by all the requirements that are being put on your back, right? So, what's that? Art. Oh, that's even better. We'll get to that in a minute. So what do we do to support teachers? Well, I already told you my feelings on the Secretary of Education. That's one thing that's got to change.
Michael Bennett.
Secondly, and I'm not just saying this because I married a teacher, although that's helped me get an education about education. We have a shortage of teachers right now. Sometimes when there's a shortage, it raises the question of whether you are paying enough. And when it comes to teachers, we are not. We need to pay teachers better. In fact, we need to build up the whole profession, because right now we're hearing a lot of teachers, in fact, for the first time ever, a majority of teachers say they would discourage their kids from following their footsteps. That is a chilling statistic, because we need teachers more than ever. And if we honored our teachers a little more like soldiers and paid them a little more like doctors, then we'd be better off as a country. It also means making sure we're getting more resources to our educators, paraprofessionals, the kind of school support, mental health first aid training, and places to refer kids to. It also helps us break that school to prison pipeline. But we can't ask teachers to shoulder the burden of every issue that kids are bringing with them into the school building. That's why we got to support kids inside and outside of school. We got to make sure that of course we need assessments to see how kids are doing, but let's not turn it into a fetish and crowd out the actual craft that teachers have learned to practice, which is to instruct students. And since I heard a little bit about art, let me mention one more thing. Look, STEM education is very important. We got to do it in new ways. That's not all there is to the story, though. We got to make sure that we're preparing kids for a world where anything that you repeat all the time can be done by a machine. And so what's going to matter more than ever is problem solving, dealing with the unexpected, dealing with other human beings, social and emotional learning. And that is one reason why we cannot treat humanities and arts education and civics education like a luxury. They are a necessity. And the other reason they're a necessity is we're not just educating workers, we're educating citizens and parents, and we need to make sure that the whole child gets an opportunity to develop and succeed. And again, that starts with supporting our teachers. So thank you for what you do.
This is from Anna. What are your plans for America's natural resources, our national parks, and public lands?
Yes. Thank you, Anna. And again, if you're here, just give a wave and a holler. I hear you. I can't quite see you, but... No, there you are. So it starts with the knowledge that our public lands and natural resources are a public trust. It's something that we are given stewardship over. It's not the same thing as being able to do whatever you want. We need to make sure that we are maintaining that trust through generations. And that is why we need to protect public lands from attempts to privatize and chop them up right and left. We need to protect them from environmentally destructive practices that are encroaching on public lands, just as we need to act when they're encroaching on tribal sovereignty, when there needs to be free, prior, and informed consent. And that's why we need to invest in protecting those public lands and natural resources so that they are not depleted in our time, but there for generations to come to cherish and to love.
From Mark, Denver.
Hi, Mark.
Should we arm our teachers to address school violence?
No. You know, as we talked about a moment ago, we're already asking teachers and educators to not only teach, but to counsel, to guide, to shape, and to deal with a whole lot of things. The idea that they're going to suddenly turn into a trained, armed guard, and that's a fair thing to ask of teachers when we haven't even done the basics, like doing something about background checks and red flag laws to make sure that our communities are safer. One of the reasons that I felt I was making myself useful when I joined the military, one of the reasons why people let that flag become a patch on their shoulder and carry weapons into war zones if necessary, is so that teachers and kids and others here at home don't have to. You're not supposed to have to. So let's take care of the basics. And yes, that's one of the reasons why weaponry, like the kind of stuff I trained on in the military, has no business being sold for profit anywhere near an American school or neighborhood, church, synagogue, or shopping center.
This is our last
Last one.
question.
I'll be real concise and we'll cheat and we'll do two. How about that? All right. I'll be sharp.
Yeah, Pete.
Okay, this is from Michael Denver.
Hello.
What will you do to address the physician shortage as baby boomers are again?
Great question. So, this is a really important question because, look, there's a controversy over coverage, right? Medicare for all who want it, which is clearly the best, versus Medicare for all versus other ACI, whatever. And that controversy is so sexy that it's sucked up all the attention from the other things we got to deal with in healthcare. It's obviously very important, and I believe in our position on it, but we got to be dealing with issues around mental health. We got to be dealing with issues around rural health where we're losing providers. We got to deal with racial inequity in health outcomes, from the black maternal mortality gap to what's happening with cancer mortality, in HIV transmission for Latino men. We got to be dealing with issue after issue, and one of them is this question: what about the provider side? What about making sure that we have the right number and level of providers, and especially serving in underserved areas? So, first of all, this is why, no matter how the coverage is structured, we got to make sure reimbursement rates are set up in a way that encourages more people to go into the field, especially in underserved areas. It's why we got to make sure that we build up support for career path development and education, especially where we see the education of people who have not historically gone on to careers in medicine. It's why my national service program, to create 1 million paid voluntary national service opportunities a year, I'm glad it's got some supporters here. And how many folks here would consider becoming part of a community health corps for a year of service that would help deliver health outcomes? And if more people did that when they were just starting out, then more people would learn about the rewarding professions that are available in medicine. And one more thing. So we have this program, or at least we're supposed to, it's on the books, for loan forgiveness for people who go into public service, right? It's a great idea, and it's almost impossible to actually use. So we got to make a whole bunch of reforms to make it more generous and more user-friendly, but one of those reforms is for providers going into underserved areas. If you're in mental health or if you're a doc, whether you are .gov, .org or not, I regard that as public service, and it should qualify for that kind of loan forgiveness.
Okay. This is from Natalie Greeley. I am a nurse.
Awesome.
How do we make healthcare affordable? I had a patient today refuse care due to cost.
So another example of one of these really important parts of healthcare that's not getting talked about while we're fighting over coverage, right? Now, part of the answer is in coverage, right? Making sure that, first of all, there's no such thing as an uninsured American. And making sure that as we design that coverage program I was talking about, that we do it in a way that's affordable for everybody, that is free for those who can't afford otherwise, and that no matter how much you're earning, that 8.5% of your income is the most that could go toward premiums. That way we make sure that it's affordable. Because it's got to be heartbreaking as somebody who trained and learned how to take care of a patient, to have a patient resisting care because they don't think they can afford it. I remember seeing this happen myself. A situation where there was a kid experiencing what I thought was a seizure and turned out to be a drug overdose. And we called 911, and they came, they did a great job. As they're wheeling him into the ambulance, he's saying, "Don't take me to the hospital, I don't have any money." Should be the last thing he's thinking about. But it's even gotten into his head that he somehow should refuse care. So we've got to make sure everybody's covered, that they know they're covered, that the coverage is affordable, and that out-of-pocket costs are controlled. Which brings me to the subject of pharmaceutical costs. when we have drug companies raising prices, not because they need to, not because of a supply shortage, not because it's necessary for innovation, but because they can, the time has come to regulate and enforce and say, no, you can't. Not if it's just this kind of gouging. And one more detail on this. I think I'm the only candidate who's talked about the out-of-pocket caps we're going to put in on things like prescription drug costs. That no matter where you are in the subsidy setup, that it's capped at $250 a month or less, depending on your income. It's got to be a monthly cap, because how many people are facing situations where you're delaying medical care, whether it's a procedure or filling a prescription, so that it happens in the right month after you hit your cap? It makes no sense. It's not medically based. And who among us experiences the economy on a yearly basis? I don't get my bills once a year. We don't get our paychecks once a year. We live on a monthly basis out here in the real world, and so should our caps on out-of-pocket costs in healthcare. So those are some of the things we can do. All right, great job. One more big thank you to Rebecca for being your voice and guiding our conversation. And just before we close, I want to say another word about what it's going to take to turn all of this around. I am preaching to the choir, because you're here. And that means you're where it begins. So much depends on your willingness to reach out to others who are still maybe just bewildered by the sheer number of people who decided to run for president. Or worse, maybe watching that news come out of Washington and this close to switching the whole thing off. Remember, that's how he wins. This is the time to bring everybody we can into the process and let them know that it is in our hands. To spread to them the most convincing message of all, which actually is not what I have to say. No matter how effective my ads are or my speeches are, the most effective thing is for somebody in your life to come to you and tell you why they're involved. And you all have the power to do that. And that power will be so important as this election comes to Colorado, which will be a decisive state for the future of this race. So I want to leave you with the idea of hope. Now, I know hope went out of style for a little bit in our political vocabulary, because we know how bleak the moment has become. But I am propelled into this by a spirit of hope. I am propelled into this by the belief that it matters who's in charge. As a matter of fact, you can't run for office unless you have that kind of hope. There's a reason that they took the word hopeful, turned it into a noun, and use it as another word for candidate. Have you noticed that? I'm a 2020 hopeful. That's what I'm doing here. How fitting! Because running for office is an act of hope, and so is volunteering, and so is voting. So are you ready to spread that sense of hope to everybody you know? Are you ready to bring about a better future? Are you ready to find some joy along the way? Because we've got to find joy in that process. Colorado, I think you are going to help me become the nominee and the next president of the United States. Help me do that, and we'll make history together. And I will do everything I can to make you proud. Thank you for being here. Thank you for caring. Thank you for making history with us, and we will be together on the trail. Thank you.